My name is Anthony Kazub. I'm Vice Chair of the Toronto Audio Engineering Society. I've had a couple last-minute dropouts on this panel because of illness as well as weather, so luckily we have an expert. If you go backstage, they're going to get your mic on. And Kevin from Wardbeck Systems showed up after skipping out of his son's birthday party. So, but you know, it was over by 10 o'clock anyway, so it's not a huge deal. And then we have some other presenters. My obsession is obviously the technology. This is why I got into this industry. I was a terrible musician that got obsessed with technology. I was a much better microphone placer on drums than drummer. So that kind of grew my obsession into something that has taken a very interesting turn. Ultimately, this panel that we've convened is about manufacturing. We have a lot of black box solutions in our industry, and it's very difficult to give appeal to these black box solutions. It's very difficult to fill these black boxes with the things that you need to accomplish your job. And by filling those boxes with electronic goodness has changed over the years, and we've seen transitions that have taken us in new directions because of the influence of outside industries. So what I want to do is, Morton Lave could not make it. Morton was is a Toronto native, and he's not a Toronto native, he's a Toronto resident who was heavily involved in DSP design for TC Electronic, which ultimately got bought by the music group, Uli's music group. And Jeff Shorthouse, who unfortunately came down with food poisoning and cannot make it, and he is one of our local manufacturers that you know as Yorkville and Yorkville Sound, which includes some of the brands like ART, Yorkville Amplifiers, their PA systems, and et cetera, et cetera. So unfortunately, their viewpoint is going to be represented by somebody else. The replacement is Josh. Josh, did I get Josh's last name? What's your last name, Josh? You got a microphone on?
I do.
Okay, what's your last name?
The Canadian way is Karakas. The Hungarian way is Karakesh.
Karakesh. So Josh is the future consumer. You know, I have to say this guy is living in 2030. If you've seen his demonstration, he is living in 2030. And here we are stuck in 2018 dealing with the things that we need to deal with. So to have the future consumer's point of view is a very interesting one. And Kevin Liver, like I said, from Wardbeck Systems Wardbeck Systems has been making technology in Toronto for 20 years, and we are a local manufacturer. So I'm going to bring these gentlemen out to the stage. We have Dave Gunnis from Fulcrum Acoustics joining us. Dave is an engineer extraordinaire who is, you're a metallurgist, you're a DSP designer, you are a carpenter, you are a woodworker, you are a craftsman of metal, a DSP, and electricity. So this is Dave Gunnis of Fulcrum Acoustics.
Never heard it described that way.
We'll do an order. Dave Hayden from Outboard UK, obviously is a visionary in multi-dimensions. So his technology, very DSP-based, would help with somebody like myself who moves and wanders around the stage and you know, participates in. I'm an object moving on the stage in Dave's opinion. So I'm going to bring out Dave Hayden from Outboard UK if he's mic'd up. No, it doesn't matter. But I've got Denis Tremblay. Denis Tremblay, he is well known in the Toronto audio industry for his work with a very small projector company that made big impacts on the industry. Denis is recently retired from IMAX as, you were chief everything.
Senior research scientist.
Senior research scientist. So he was there for a long time. He was at the top, and he did a lot of science. So Denis Tremblay, we'll bring him out.
I'll jump in through now. I made it.
All right, he's back. That object's back into the game. And Josh, we want to come. And Kevin Liver, like I say, from Warbeck Systems. We just returned from IBC in Amsterdam for presenting some new technology at the IP showcase. So Kevin Liver, everybody. All right, I got the panel. I have the terrifying fear of falling off this stage, so let's keep this. Well, welcome, gentlemen. So I want to start off at the end there with you, Dave. We're at the state of sound. What is the state of sound, in your opinion, and where are we going with this?
Well, you know, there's going to be a lot more of the same. I'm pretty focused on the last element in the chain, and you know, there's radical changes going on in the front end of the entire audio chain. The back end is changing, you know, more gradually, I would say, but you know.
Where does the back end start for you? Is the back end at the amplifier?
My back end starts a little farther forward than most loudspeaker guys.
Okay.
Mine
okay.
starts at the input to the DSP. So I include the DSP and the amplifier in my loudspeaker.
Okay, so you were decentralizing DSP to be a part of.
It's just that the DSP is part of. For me, the DSP is part of the loudspeaker design.
Okay, I gotcha. Does the future involve a smarter speaker, or is the smarter speaker of the future your objective for the technology?
Well, the speakers are pretty smart already. I'm at least part of the industry has been going the same direction as me, which is including the DSP and amplification as part of the loudspeaker design. It lets you, you know, move things around so that when you have a problem, you can either solve it in the loudspeaker or you can solve it in the DSP. And in a lot of cases, moving the solution to the DSP allows you to solve something in the loudspeaker that you couldn't otherwise solve.
Right, right, yeah.
So yeah, it's very integrated now, and that's a relatively new development. I mean, people have been using processors on speakers for a long time, but it was not as pervasive as it is now. And Meyer, I would guess you would say, would be the pioneer of that, since way back in the 80s, they declared that they would sell no speaker that didn't have a processor. So it's kind of come around. For me, the digital aspect of it is what made the difference in making that change. But my company, Fulcrum Acoustic, has started in 2008, and we've never made a speaker that didn't require digital processing.
Makes sense. Well, every time I sit on a panel with Denis, you know, always tells me, well, we were doing that 25 years ago or something like that. So, but secretly behind in some laboratory, you know, Denis was working on the solution. So Denis, you know, I take that, you know, what is the state of sound and where are we going next with this stuff?
Well, in reference to the DSP processing for equalization, the year would be 2009.
2000. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
I generally agree with what's just been said here. I think most of this will be pushed forward into an integrated loudspeaker design where the DSP, the power amplifier, and the loudspeaker are really all one unit, hopefully with enough flexible DSP that you can do useful things with it. That said, there's still something to be done with loudspeaker acoustics that can't entirely be corrected with DSP. So the loudspeaker designers still have a stake in this game.
Right.
Probably more of the management and control of that DSP will be exposed to the user. That was always my fondest wish. You know, most of the processors you see today, you can expose things that look like parametric equalizers and graphic equalizers, which are really fictions. It would be nice to be able to more directly get into the nuts and bolts and work at it at a more sophisticated level. I expect we will begin to see much more of that.
Less GUI, more API?
Yeah, stuff which is more aimed at the higher level professional who can get in there and play with the fine details, is not restricted to, you know, the conventional ideas of what an equalizer is.
You are a unique, you are a unique consumer of technology. Does having those hooks and handles into the equipment excite you about the technology, or is it something that the user should never actually see? Your user experience for your system integration, is that something that augments what you're getting into, or is it something that inhibits the process of having a deliverable?
Well, I'm trying to get used to the idea of saying with my former employer, a very sophisticated service organization. So having access to that kind of detailed, deep exposure of the functions of the DSP, fine details of the tuning and the alignment and so on would be of benefit to them. It would certainly be a benefit to the people who are doing the installations. So this is something beyond a conventional contractor sort of scenario where each system is quite different and it has to be done relatively quickly, and there's a limited depth of knowledge in some of the end users. That is not necessarily a scenario that applies in this case.
I want to separate you from your former employer, so can you tell the audience what is occupying that mind right now?
Retirement.
So you've never been busier?
I've never been busier.
That's exciting. That is very exciting. Yeah. Dave, I have seen your technology. I have read your literature. I have watched the videos. I've been in your head. So
bad luck.
It's we're entering an object-oriented world. As speakers become smart, and the technology that you deliver is becoming a little bit more distributed amongst smart devices. What do you see the state of sound right now, and where are we going with this?
Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, clearly it's becoming a bit of the big I word, the immersive thing. The immersive thing is obviously a major part of it, and we're finding that conversation that's being stimulated by some of the major players, you know who I mean, the loudspeaker companies, is actually drawing even more people to us into an area where we hadn't been present. This frontal panorama thing that with synthesized panoramas, as opposed to the purist sort of empirical localization that we do normally with operatic and orchestral type environments. The can't hear the PA sort of thing, Also, because of the massive conversation going around about immersion and it meaning different things to different people, we're finding that the experiential market is making greater demands on us. One very obvious example is the theme park market, which we've got involved with in the last couple of years, with some ride cars with time axes actually built into them. They've kind of left the sound as a second cousin for some time now, and they've made amazing kind of animatronics and video and electronics, lighting and that kind of system, that kind of thing. But because the consumer level immersive environment, things that you put on your face and on your ears, has become so advanced, gaming, etc. The sound has just got to get better to catch up, So there is some conversation about not just new rides, new attractions, wanting to have this kind of enhanced immersive sound, but actually go around refurbishing the old ones to bring them up to speed. And once that starts, it's a house of cards, they're catalysts.
It's a new world after all. I think that was the first immersive.
So the live performance thing is very big. The more and more people want to have that spatialized outcome, and then the experiential market seems to be a growth in needing something a bit more than just car speakers mounted in the wall.
This is true. This is true. Denis, you were.
I was just sorry, I need some audio. I was just going to comment on sound being the poor cousin here. So a friend of mine, a former colleague, the late Dave Ramsahoy, used to point out that if you're in a theater and the sound fails, or rather the image fails, what you have is a radio. If you're in a theater and the sound fails, what you have is a fishbowl.
Yeah, fishbowl.
So the sound is more important. But
This
people
is
give
true.
credit.
I like to say if the audio fails, what you have is surveillance.
Yep.
So it's a little bit different, but it leads into the immersive side of things, where I look at Josh as the consumer of the future and a pioneer for a different user experience, as well as a different tactileness, or a completely untactile disconnection from the sound source to the deliverable. Josh, you're a visionary from the technology and your involvement with SIRT here. What is the state of sound in your opinion?
Ever evolving. Personally, I'm fortunate enough to work in a very controlled environment. And to be entirely honest, breaking out of the box terrifies me. I work with 2 channels. Ultimately, I decode binaurally. So I have it's a lot simpler to work with in my field. Where I see it going, ideally, virtual reality, augmented reality, they're often viewed as very isolated experiences. And one of the major things that people bring up is they want to share that experience.
Right.
So figuring out ways of translating a meticulously decoded binaural feed into loudspeaker reproduction is absolutely interesting.
Well, it's like you say, the ability to take my masterpiece or my immersive creation and play it back or wherever that is non-technology dependent is the dream. But yeah, I do think we need to sort that out. But that'll come. We'll talk about that in a second here. I'll talk about that. Kevin.
Anthony.
I'm glad you could be here.
Oh, thank you.
Well, we've gone through a bit of a renaissance in the last little while here. Wardbeck has gone from the very traditional analog to where it is now. What is the state of sound in your opinion of where we stand?
Well, traditionally, Wardbeck clients are radio and television broadcasters, and I believe that they're heading towards a converged network where they can leverage the benefits of an IT infrastructure and alleviate some of the pressures of distribution of audio signals and distribution of video signals through traditional copper cables. We're starting to see that. We participated in the IP showcase. This is our fourth or fifth IP showcase that we participated in. And we're starting to get to the point of critical mass where we're no longer selling the idea of the technology, but we're showing the benefit of the hardware that's on the network. So I think that we're at that point where you're going to see some change. You're starting to see that with our national broadcaster starting to make some steps towards an all IP infrastructure.
Can anybody guess how many IP networks are currently running in this building? I'm talking different networks. I think we have about 6 networks that are currently making this show possible, and that is exactly where we end up.
My guess would have been 5.
Sorry?
My guess would have been 5.
5.
That's
I brought my own, actually, over there. I brought my own network. So
Mine has 3.
Yours has 3? So 3 networks to make one system operate. Okay, I gotcha. Well, and that management has really changed how we deliver things. Dave, I have to ask, do your speakers have the ability to be controlled over a network, or is it all just a dynamic?
We do make self-powered speakers that are controlled over Ethernet and have AES EBU, which can be forwarded through through a Cat5 connector. But of course, given my definition of a speaker, which includes an amp and a DSP box, certainly all the DSP boxes are network devices.
The DSP. Yeah. So how has IP changed your design philosophy in terms of DSP? Is it, we're seeing IP first in terms of deliverables, but is IP first now an important part of your design philosophy?
It doesn't really affect the way I design a loudspeaker. Once I have a signal input to my system, I'm just going to try and reproduce it as accurately as possible. So I don't really care how the signal got there.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a pain because we have to chase after the whims of the market switching from one format to the next every 5 years.
It is. It comes down to the standards. Well, I have to ask the whole panel, if anybody wants to jump in on this, how has the AES standards influenced some of your designs, and how do the standards that us as a society contribute, impact your day-to-day operations?
I think the AES 67 has brought a little bit of stability in how we're going to be distributing content.
Okay. Stability, I'll take that.
Yeah, the control over Ethernet and distribution over Ethernet are really the way to go. It simplifies wiring, minimize interconnect mistakes and so on and so forth, but it needs a little bit more clarity
Clarity from what point of view? Like,
from the implementation point of view. If you're going to design one of these networks, what are you going to choose? How are you going to implement it? Hopefully it will be very simple and clear and clean.
okay. So you say AES 67, and I'll clarify this for the group, that AES 67 is only a transport mechanism.
Yep.
And it does not define any of the control sides of things. Is control the last frontier for a lot of device manufacturers?
I think you're starting to see a little bit of that, where some legacy manufacturers, legacy that have their own proprietary flavors of audio over IP, whether that's WheatNet or Livewire, you're starting to see some of their they're touting control as their selling feature, and the systems that they build are quite fantastic. They put a lot of hard work into those systems. So.
Do you think we've gone through protocol wars? There's a million control protocols that are in automation systems, that are in automotive, that are in robots, that are in pyrotechnics, lighting. You know, what can we learn from control protocols to smooth this out? And is there a control protocol to rule them all, or are we just going to be stuck with an infinite amount of proprietary control protocols?
I think that there's going to be continual overlap between industry. A local broadcaster did an event recently where there was lighting and audio and video signals that were all there tied in with one another. But for a radio station, they may not need some of these other potential pyrotechnic control. So it's not one size fits all type solution. It's kind of pick and choose which standards benefit your event or your solution.
There would be a benefit in the audio world to at least converge on a generally agreed control protocol for audio systems, which is widely used. I mean,
Right.
being one of the older guys, back in the day, we would plug gear together. Once you plugged that XLR in, you knew that signal would get through, and things were fairly straightforward, and you could interconnect a system relatively quickly. Unless there's some form of relatively standardized protocol or open source protocol where you can reliably interconnect pieces of gear without having to worry that it's going to turn into a struggle or you're not going to be able to talk to a piece of gear.
But that makes the problem that Josh was highlighting about transportability of this content that we've created even more possible, just possible, if there is an agreed upon method to be able to define objects or define levels. In audio, we have X, Y, Z, up, 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 and off. You know, why has it taken so long to disagree about up, 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 off, and where I am?
Excellent question. I cannot answer that one.
Okay, sorry. I should be on a panel about this.
Should be.
I think it has to do with...
Be on the standards committee.
It is. I am on the standards committees, and they are just a mess of bureaucracy. It's like I say, we were talking, you go into a rabbit hole, and inside that rabbit hole are 3 other rabbit holes, and then there's rabbits fighting down there, and you can't argue with them because they just enjoy fighting, is really kind of what it really comes down to. But is it a matter of, Dave, is it a matter of creating your own? Is it being there first? Like I said, you know, writing the standard costs the same first as it does to follow a standard later on.
It's interesting. First, everybody's got to write down what things they want to control, and everybody has faders and EQs and things like that. But this discussion has come up on another panel I was involved with about the standardizing on terminology and measurables for spatial audio. I'm segueing into that because it's one that is a new thing, right? And the challenge there is actually what is it that your box is doing and your box is, and what are the overlaps? Because people's approach to it are quite different. You know, there are waveform synthesis approaches, there are ambisonic approaches, there's binaural in your two-channel system, and it's really actually quite hard to know whether you're sometimes what you call localization is actually panning, and what you call localization is actually localization. And so at that level, that's not a control thing. That's a terminology for what the achievable outcome is, right? Once you've defined that, you're then going to want to say, okay, what are the controls, width, depth, all that stuff's creeping into the language, which we haven't really had before. So that challenge will raise itself as well.
Well, we have actuators, and then we have sensors.
Yeah, we have in our system a number of levels of control. Obvious ones starting at the high level with things like MIDI and MIDI controllers, and all the way down to a very detailed XML document to tell you how to talk to it with UDP packets. And this is something that generally you can give to anybody who talks Media Lawn or AMX or Crestron or whatever, and they'll go, oh yeah, I get this, and they'll control it, you know. So, and that's for a fairly rudimentary set of parameters of the kind that we all know, plus XYZ. But the XYZ thing gets a bit. That UDP area is a bit lacking in that. So there we've moved to OSC, which is an old established protocol, and that's really cut out more for doing XYZ.
Sorry, which one? Sorry?
Open sound control.
Okay,
which is a generic protocol that is used. I don't know, maybe you could sort of call it like an audio control equivalent of MIDI. It's free, and it's something that everybody can use. And for example, Digico consoles have a little OSC window in them, and that's how it talks to Elisa. They've just skinned an OSC window with a skin that looks like their software, and that's something that we're doing with them as well, and so will DMB. And so in that context, for what I know, there are a set of tools that are almost standard actually. I mean, you know, that's
I know
for doing what we're doing anyway.
So, you know, looking towards what we were just discussing earlier about, you know, pushing out DSP and amplifiers into the loudspeaker grid and integrating it into the loudspeaker. Now you would have to look at some form of distributed processing for all this, because
it's a multi-channel
one loudspeaker by itself
Yeah.
you know, is not going to be panning very effectively. So it gets
true.
more and more
I
complex.
understand, yeah, in terms of what each speaker does, you've got to tell it to go up while that one goes down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So something
Well,
has
that's
to be
what I do,
controlled
so
that.
you know, you don't need to worry about that. But we have talked about distributing that box around the speaker system. It's not an
100%.
unthinkable thing to do with Dante.
A speaker can receive 128 channels with an
Sure.
Ethernet cable.
Yeah.
And then it can also receive a very small command saying, turn this one up now relative to where I
Add a
am.
bit of delay to it.
And adding a bit of delay to it.
Yeah.
Well, what can we learn from leveraging engines that exist in the world, such as gaming and immersive and VR, and worlds such as lighting, which is, you know, I would say 15 years ahead of audio in terms of control protocols and WYSIWYG, and what you hear is what you get is not yet a thing, but it will be, I think. So what can we learn from lighting and the immersive AR stuff that we don't necessarily see on a day-to-day basis?
I think as the networks become more converged, some of the best of breed will come to the top, and you'll benefit. Each ecosystem will benefit one another as protocols evolve, but it's just a matter of time, I believe.
Yeah, Josh.
So my world's kind of the Wild West, completely unstandardized.
Yes.
So for me personally, I gravitate always towards the open source solutions. I want to zip over to GitHub, find what I need, implement it, and use it. In the instance of game engines interacting with lighting, I just had a very interesting use case recently where in a virtual production situation, we're filming an actor, compositing them into a virtual environment. Now we want the physical lighting to match the virtual lighting, and the physical lighting to be controlled by the virtual lighting. So I implemented OSC and just did a very simple OSC to DMX, and I'm just firing events from within engine, and that's triggering my lighting in the real world. Minimal latency, relatively simple setup, and again, open source.
Very good. So how does the open source community influence your designs in terms of, you know, Dave, your manufacturer of speakers? Do you leverage open source stuff in terms of production or prototyping? What type of open
design
source
work? Certainly, there's some, because there's a lot of to design a loudspeaker now. You have to have a lot of programming. Programmed tools. And most of what I use to design loudspeakers is the stuff that I've written myself in C++.
Okay.
And so there's lots of open source programming aids that get used. I mean, not the least of which just OpenGL for graphical displays and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's an important part of the programming world these days.
leveraging the open source community.
absolutely.
Do you contribute to the open source community, and how do you contribute to the open source community? You know, like you can take and take and take, but ultimately it won't be there for the next person if you don't contribute. How do you contribute to the open source community?
We just shipped an open source library with AMD, a collaboration partnership between us and AMD. It shipped in February
Okay.
on GPU Open, and that is our real-time acoustic simulation. So that's OpenCL accelerated and completely open source. You can use it and ship it as much as you want.
Is the partnership with universities and real life applications from manufacturers the thing that is the seed within academia? Is without industry, is it very hard for academia to develop these types of things?
Well, we are a non-for-profit, so we do need funding
You need
ultimately
funding.
to continue
Oh,
our
okay.
research, if anyone's interested.
So
But we're structured slightly different than academia. We are very much applied research, and that could mean just implementing existing solutions and testing them in a production environment.
right, and that partnership. What type of partnership do you hope for next, or what's your next? Are you graduating? Are you going from here? Are you planning to be an educator to share this on, or are you looking to practice the craft that you've now cultivated?
Well, kind of our goal here at SIRT is to help industry grow. And ultimately, we want to pass on all the knowledge from all of our various research projects. I mean, we're unfortunately tied with intellectual property agreements, but beyond that, I mean, ideally, we want to open source everything we do here.
Right. The open source community has allowed the engineer of the future is a computer engineer. We got how many? We got programmers sitting here. Who's written software? Kevin. Kevin's written software. Kevin wrote the big VU meters at Wardbeck Systems. We had a VU meter that was over a meter, and we were going to call it the over a meter, but it didn't take off.
That was an open source.
That was an open source. So how many quintillion math equation processes do you think you've done in your lifetime with the software that you've written? You know, we have probably 10 to the power of 4,000 on this panel. You know, we've got a lot of DSP math. How has the importance of math changed and changed throughout the years as the internet is exposing us to open source software that allows us to work faster, calculations that we can leverage some microservice on the cloud? How are you using the computing processes of 2018 to expedite your design processes?
Well, our company actually started to use Max MSP for quite a lot of emulation because we're working on FPGA platform.
Right.
And you can. So I'm going to probably get myself into trouble here from people who know a lot more than me, but because it's beyond my pay grade. But I know that the conversations I get involved with are how far that we can go down a route of a design and actually hear the outcome using something like Max before we having to commit to coding it and it actually being an accurate representation of how much resource it will take up. Because you always, with a multi-channel system that you want to make really clever, you know, and fancy is. You've got to square the amount of resource you have because it's a matrix, you know, it's not just an input-output. So we have to be, even with the latest and greatest mighty powerful DSP that we have now, we need to be very careful to pre-emulate stuff so that we know it's going to work. And we've also, with the new tracking system design research, we've been using Node-RED, which is a relatively new thing.
Yeah, it's open source, yeah, IBM.
And that's been really helpful to just glue things together in that area in ways that I also don't understand, so I won't go any further. But you know, these are the things that we're finding, and just I'd heard of them all before. Like MATLAB goes back a long time with what you guys do, right?
Forever.
But those sort of tools are vital to us now. You know, we'd have to write the code and try it out first, and then it would take.
So the software tools, the barriers of the software tools allows you to fail faster.
And just chuck that away and do something else.
Do something else.
Doesn't
Rapid
sound right.
prototyping.
Yeah, you can. test your hypothesis very
It's the
quickly.
breadboard of the future. if
The
that's
breadboard
right
of the
way.
future?
Dare I say that?
Yeah,
So,
that's good. I like that. I really like that.
Dare say that.
I deal with Wireshark a lot, and I say it's the oscilloscope of a network.
There you go.
So these tools, how do we share the exposure to these tools to audio engineers who aren't necessarily electrical engineers or have a B science in computer engineering? Are these tools becoming a little bit more accessible now with DSP right into the speaker, DSP right into the microphone preamp? What are we doing to enable the user community of the future with these programming tools?
So, the DSP interfaces that users typically see are simplified interfaces. Like I was saying earlier, there are emulations of parametric and graphic equalizers and faders that everybody's familiar with. There's certainly more capability there for somebody with an advanced understanding of these things. It's generally not exposed. Now, to your earlier question about, how much of an impact has math had on this, once you're out of the analog domain, frankly, it's all math.
Right.
So a huge impact. From a sort of senior level professional user, it would be nice to get products, as I was saying in the introduction, where you don't have to be limited by these emulations of analog hardware gear and to be able to get in there and do things at a fairly sophisticated level. We don't see very much of that yet.
Yeah, I look at the console that's up front, and we have an analog console emulator. Is how I like to look at that. But ultimately, it's a GUI-controlled database that controls, and the database is the thing that the DSP references. So what are we doing? Again, that type of mix engine, a band shows up and it's this console, and a band shows up and it's this console, but ultimately it's just a database of up, and down, and off. What do you see the future of mixing consoles as they become, completely virtualized, on a network or over an AES protocol or something of that sort?
Good question. What is that interface going to look like? We certainly haven't seen it yet. As I said, we're continuing to emulate what the past was like.
Right.
What's the future going to look like?
One thing you
Good
can say
question.
for sure is that people will initially hate it.
Generally,
Yes,
they change.
that's how you know you're on the right track. That's how you know you're on the right track. I hate this. This is terrible.
It is interesting, though, that the
way they
hardware control
hated digital consoles.
has never gone away. And one of your panelists on the very erudite recording panel, producer panel, said, I can work faster with the band if I've got a mixing desk in front of me.
Right.
Because, and to some of us, if it's an analog one, you can work even faster. But of course, if you're familiar with the digital one, you've got the benefits of all that. But I think that the HUI generic area has still got a long way to go. But it's interesting; it hasn't changed that much as well. Which is also
It is an immediacy thing, the immediacy of there's knob, there's feedback, shut it down, see it, indication, blah blah blah. I don't think the immediacy will ever disappear, because when your speaker is receiving a corrupted something, you want to be able to turn it down as fast as you can.
This is where AI can really start to take over as well, where you want to know what is wrong on your network rather than what's going on that's right.
Right.
And if there's feedback, then there could be a sensor that's on the network that can control that feedback mechanism, or at least warn somebody that this is the handle that you need to touch to do something with it. You're starting to see that type of thinking happening as well.
Well, it all comes down to negative feedback. None of this is possible without negative feedback. Am I wrong?
Going back probably 12, 15 years, I remember looking at some programming that Bruce Jackson was working on. This was, probably around 2003. But he was starting out with essentially a picture of a stage where he had the performers, and you would touch the performer, and then you knew that's the controls you were working with. And that was, at the time, was pretty radical. It never really went anywhere, but you could see almost like a heads-up display where you just look at the performer, and then you can make your adjustments because that's who you're looking at. Just leave out the mixing board and just have essentially one channel that is applied to whoever you look at.
I want a VU meter above your head going,
Yes.
that guy's talking right now, so his headlight's red. I think you were working on you have a flow you just showed me a couple of minutes ago where it took an incoming array and then generated a color based on the flow. So is the augmented mixer not too far away now that we've done the engines of it?
Augmented, yes. I mean, I think we're there right now. In terms of the future of things, I mean, you touched on briefly on AI, and I'm going to be way out of my element here. But I mean, the current state of things is if you provide a network with enough training data, you can get it to do anything.
Right. But are we missing metadata? You know, are speakers spitting out metadata yet? Or is this microphone got a little bit of metadata? Does it have enough metadata? You're augmenting your performance spaces with additional transmitters. You're adding additional, you're capturing motion. You're capturing, temperature of power and offsets of all of this stuff. Do we have enough metadata? Without that, our AI is nearly impossible without
How much is enough?
How much is enough? Well,
It's like the old Einstein quote about everything should be as simple as possible, but not more.
right, okay.
Where does the not more live?
Well, I think in audio, you can break it down to a sine wave. You can break it down to that where it is and what it's doing, and you're working in the time domain and the frequency domain in that case, and that's where the DSP really starts to.
The interesting AI discussion, just because somebody said to me the other day, a leading sound consultant the other year, that it won't be long. He defined a time period. It was very short, a year or two, when everything will be auto-mixed.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, he said it very knowledgeably and very sort of, expressively. And I just thought it's absolutely not going to happen because there is a point at which you could logically say you could have some target mix data intelligence, that you could somehow target, like a response curve in a room that you target. And so, around that time, I went and did USITT, which we used to do every year in America, and they took a big, in the Fort Worth arena, they took a big room and hung up some DMB and some Maya and put some desks in, and they had students come along. They could book a spot, and they could all mix the same band, a country band or something. And it was we had a little booth at the back doing our thing, and it was absolutely phenomenal to listen to how varied those mixes were. So how often do you hear the same band mixed 3, 4, 5 times over, and none of them were shit. They were actually just completely different subjectively. And I just thought the way that relates to the comment about everything will be auto-mixed in the future, I just think there is a point at which the human touch is going to continue to prevail, albeit made easier by the kind of head-up display, AR, sort of
The
subjectivity.
creativity has to come in from somewhere.
The subjectivity has still got a place to play. However, if you're having a conference, that's where you have your auto mixing.
But the human touch is based on decisions made on experience, and AI is the exact same thing. If you record every show and every fader move and every fader decision and every EQ decision, you're essentially feeding the AI that information. So you could take those 3 bands, mix this 3 different ways, and create an AI engine that can average them.
You could make it learn what a good sound sounds like. Or a
That would tend to
preferred sound.
converge to one characteristic sound, I think, over time.
Right.
And, the essence of creativity is to vary things, to change things, to modify things. So
Right.
I'm not sure that an AI would be terribly effective there.
Well, from an artist point of view or from a technical point of view?
From a technical point of view, great. From an artistic point of view, there'll probably be some resistance.
Right. Yeah, you get that? Yeah. Oh, we got the anti-AI guys,
They're in tonight. Yeah.
Man, I'm waiting for Bell to deliver AI to my door as a service. Like, I just turn on a tap and artificial intelligence comes out and I can rent a microservice from Bell immediately. I'm working on that. It's going to happen. Watson on demand, I think it will ultimately happen. But how do you feed that to those engines, or is that valuable to us as an industry? As we're the technical side of things. We're not absolutely the operator side of things. Is that a dream of ours, or is that a dream of our customers who consume this equipment?
Good question. What do the customers say?
Oh man. Well, from a broadcast point of view, every human is a liability. So yeah, that's what some of the customers say. You know, from a operation of a theater point of view, a human is a liability. Mouths to feed and productions to do. So let me be that customer for a second, and you give me a response to that.
Well, cinema systems are largely automated already. Perhaps the AI or some semi-intelligent control can manage the fundamental system functions in order to get the thing up and running into a reasonable state, fairly stable, and the rest of those decisions should belong to the operator, who's going to make the aesthetic decisions, going to make the artistic decisions.
Right, to meet their customer's need ultimately as an audio operator.
Yeah, the customer's need being, you know, the artists in the band or the performers on stage or whatever.
Right. So I ask everyone, how do you measure quality and success in a deployment? You know, Dave, you did a temporary deployment here on top of, like, we don't have enough speakers in this deployment.
Hardly at all.
Like in this room, we do not have enough speakers yet. So I think there's more coming tomorrow, and we'll get those hooked up. Well, how do you measure success of a deployment?
If it's interesting. It's probably subjectively if we like it or not, actually, and if not too many people walk around with their hands over their ears.
Yeah, does anybody have their hands over their ears? I see Josh. No. Just scratch.
Audience reaction is
Audience reaction?
I mean, certainly if I do some dance systems, and I'm absolutely obsessed with having nobody with their hands over their ears, where some people don't mind it being that loud and ugly and messy, but I still have power and energy, but just dig holes in it to make it pleasant, you know.
Yeah.
But in the immersion game, it is really about some form of customer satisfaction measured by their response to it, and that has to be, fun enough, related to, it's cause the start of another discussion, related to what their expectations are.
Right.
And one of the interesting things about that is if someone comes to you with a demand for something that they think they want as immersive, you have to actually establish what they mean by that, because you could get to the end and they'll say, well, I didn't expect that, you know. So for example, making all the PA disappear so the mics sound like they're just natural could be disturbing for people who I've paid for these loudspeakers but I can't hear them, you know. But to us, the ultimate success is you can't hear the PA. And there was a guy in sound design that we worked with in New York called Mark Salzberg. He did a little interview for one of our press releases, and at the end of it he said, the greatest compliment I had was somebody came up to me at the end of the show and said, I know why you didn't get a Tony, because until a mic broke I didn't realise there were any microphones.
Yeah, there you go.
And he said that was the best thing I could have had. So, you know, in that context, there's your validation.
Makes sense.
But in another, it's a very hard one to answer, actually. I mean, it's a good
right.
question. And
I'm here for the hard questions.
Yeah,
fine.
the audience remembers the performance or the film that they've seen, and remember nothing about the technology. You've succeeded.
That's a success.
For us, it's about setting a goal and then reflecting on whether you've met that goal. If you have a deployment and you set a goal based off of deployment, and the customers knows your goals, then you can have a conversation between your customer and us as a manufacturer. Did we meet that goal? And what are we challenging ourselves with? Where are we going with it? Can be something that we tried a little bit of this, but we didn't set a goal. We just wanted to see if we could get some things to work with it. But I think that's the reference that you can use.
We all customize. I look at this group and we all customize. There is nothing off the shelf that will suffice for us. So we have to customize it ourselves. What are you finding customers asking out of the blue, or are customer demands shifting into areas they know nothing about? Or is customer demand, they just want to carry less, or they just want to have less speaker and more performance? They want to have more functionality. What is the customer demand, and how has that changed over the years?
I just want to comment on the whole topic of customization. Back in the day when the dinosaurs still walked the land, a lot of equipment was custom built to begin with. It was the only way to get what you wanted. My background stretches all the way back to the heyday of Capitol Records. A lot of the electronics we used in manufacturing and production, in the quality control, and the mastering lab, were designed by Bill Whitlock, Dan Middleton, myself. They were custom one-offs because that's how you got what you needed.
Right.
And
Same-
we may be slowly
with Ward-
edging in that direction again, which would,
Same with Wardbeck
Perhaps.
Systems, started in 1967, and the consoles that we built were one-off pieces of machinery that were just incredible in comparison to what we're doing today. But software can really change where the customization experience happens. If you can have a common, we're making a fairly simple mic pre headset amplifier, and we've come up with a number of different applications that hardware fits, but the software really makes it fine-tuned to solve a problem for that particular customer. So it's the software that needs that customization.
yeah, the hardware becomes more generic. It's got enough gazintas and gazatas, to quote Neil Muncy. And what's in the box is where the customization lives. Goes back to my earlier comment about let's have an interface that allows us to do real things.
Is everything a platform now? Or are we not delivering products anymore? Are we delivering platforms for people to play on? Like I look at every product that's here, and we have customizable DSP, we have dynamics, we have software-based everything.
Well, I think for a manufacturer, especially in electronics, you have to build a certain amount of something that fits many applications' needs or many customers' needs. So you have to build in some sort of volume that makes sense, and then customize where you can customize. So you can't build a custom speaker for every particular customer. You have to build something that's a little bit vanilla, and then you can tweak it with software to their particular needs.
The line arrays are inherently customizable.
Right.
Change the shape of them.
Yeah, to a degree.
That's actually, I feel like we get a lot less requests for custom loudspeakers than we used to. Although we still do, there are some cases that are just really unique. Like one of the ones I did this year was a subwoofer that's designed to sit in a sewer.
Okay.
And it happened to be
interesting.
in
Rats?
Anaheim,
Was it a
where
rat
they had-
problem?
No, well, the problem was that the sewers that these things go in Southern California often overflow, which means the subwoofer is submersed. So this had to be a submersible subwoofer.
Customer demand,
more
but it was
and more
command,
surreal.
but it was demand driven.
It's
Somebody
a
had
fairly
a demand.
specialized application,
Yeah.
I wouldn't build a generic subwoofer that met that specification, but, I was able to do a custom one.
It's immersive.
It's immersive.
It's immersive.
10 points. You get 10 points.
Oh my! How could we have missed that?
There's a coffee cup for it. Get that man a coffee cup.
But also,
touchscreens.
with
Sorry.
the tools that we have to
Right.
do that, I mean,
The design tools of
it would have taken me a year,
Yeah.
20 years ago or 25 years ago, and I was able to design this thing in a week and have a prototype in 2 weeks and ship it a week after that.
right. So the tools that we saw CAD. CAD is becoming a skill that the average sound engineer must have. To do a curvilinear array, you must have understanding of CAD and proportions and the ability to measure with accuracy, the ability to reproduce an environment you're in, or the ability to log that metadata or information. What skills are the sound engineers of the future not receiving in education that would be of tremendous benefit, aside from computer programming?
I mean, you still have to get the fundamentals of acoustics. You have to understand how the sound works. You can be as proficient as you like with software, but if you don't really understand the behavior of the acoustics, it isn't going to help you very much. And the software isn't necessarily going to do that for you. You will model it, but the implications of what's going on comes from your personal knowledge. That still remains true, I think.
That's good. That's very good. The software ultimately is a feedback mechanism now for the operator.
It was mentioned earlier that it's a rapid and clean way of a prototyping board, basically, that's quick and easy and that saves you a lot of time. In that sense, it's a great improvement, especially the acoustics modeling stuff. I mean, back in the day, we did this on graph paper with a ruler.
Right. Scaled models and sped up and slowed down.
Yes.
They don't do that anymore. I don't
Thank
think.
God.
The trend of companies, and this was a question for Jeff Shorthouse that I wanted to ask, which is we're seeing a much more vertically integrated, delivery mechanism from, well, in the case of a theater, it's a package. Here we have a package. We have here's one solution, top to bottom, completely vertically integrated solution type of thing. And then those solutions are being rented out or consumed on a subscription model. We have software being consumed on a subscription model on a daily basis. How has that changed your development process and your deployment process? Anyone grab that?
Good question.
Oh man. So I see something like Avid, or I see something like the application. I don't own an application. I own that version of the application. But I find that the software that I get into, I buy into an ecosystem, I learn that ecosystem, and I'm stuck in that ecosystem. I look at Avid as an example, just because I don't want to pick on Avid. It's gone to a subscription model. And we have hardware that's starting to go to a subscription model if our hardware is based directly upon that software. So if my GPU only works in this environment and this vendor, et cetera, I'm into their release of things.
Yeah. Vendor lock-in is not a new concept. It's just taking it in a slightly different direction. It's always existed. So if you designed a piece of hardware and you're using, I don't know, a bunch of National Semiconductor parts, well, they're available from National Semiconductor. You've got some lock-in already. That's starting to move into the software world. Whether that's for good or ill is difficult for me to really understand, but it's more of the same in a slightly different domain.
It's easier to tax a semiconductor than it is to tax an FPGA code.
Possibly.
We have a model that coming up that's going to be more it's more related to your platform question, where you buy the number of channels you're using. I'm not sure about subscription-wise, but it's a thought.
Yeah, it is.
What's interesting is that we're an audio show control device that does spatialization. We're extremely close relation to something like QLab, which you can buy on a show-by-show basis, but because it's only software, it's easy for them to do that. But what our thing has, with the new FPGA core that it's got, you actually buy all the hardware, whatever entry-level price you pay for the box, so we have to charge you to switch on more channels, which is a bit like PowerSoft does with their amplifiers and stuff. So in a sort of slightly oblique way, answer to a question, it is something that we're looking at with selling more of a virtual product in some cases. You have to pay for the value, you have to charge for the value add, as opposed to, because all the actual equity is in the R&D, which is like a spoilt child that demands feeding all the time. So you actually have to charge for that by charging in virtual terms.
The distracting of an engineer.
R&D,
Every time you distract an engineer, that's $10,000. It's just boom,
constantly
tangent.
do,
Yeah. And he's gone for a week.
But the subscription module is what we found traditionally. Maybe we're a bit behind the curve, but we find that software is expected to be free. If if it comes with a box, it seems to be. It's expected to be free.
Well, it's hardware dependent.
Well, that makes more sense in the sense that your software will only work with that box. It tends to fall apart if it's a piece of generic software. It'll work with almost anything.
Right. But then comes the control question, and it is the generic piece of software, and that being the last straw to the equation that is an ecosystem. If it is a generic control, then it could work with absolutely anybody's. And we're seeing that with AES 67 and some of these open protocols, transport protocols, where it's, okay, now it's on the network, what do we do with it? And if these applications are able to communicate with everything, it makes that ecosystem a little bit more malleable. We've gone from a 2-layer network where it's like wire connection, that's 2 layers, and now we've got the 7 layers of the OSI model to deal with. It opens us up into a different world of things. That's for sure.
With our mic pre, we releasing an API that can handshake with many different softwares. It's just a matter of knowing the opposite end of that API and how they need to handshake with one another. That's our model right now, and we may build our own system at some point in time, but at this point in time, we have to handshake with as many partners as we possibly can.
That makes sense. Now that we're shipping software more than anything, it's a little bit easier to traverse borders with software than it is with hardware. You know, we all deliver some type of piece of hardware, and now we have levies and borders and NAFTA up for how is that affecting your business model? You know, National Semiconductor, where do they make their stuff, and how
All over the world.
all over the world? How has that changed your manufacturing process, Dave?
Well, the recent silliness with the tariffs, I gained an understanding of the Harley-Davidson situation because the people we buy capacitors from were a Mexican company, but we discovered after they applied the tariffs to China that they were actually building capacitors in China. So they called us up and said that you know, we have to raise the prices on all your capacitors, but if you buy the complete crossover from us instead of assembling them yourself, we'll have them made in Taiwan and you won't have to pay the tariff on the raw component.
Interesting.
Like, all right, that's really, really making me mad, but there's no way I'm doing that because I'm not firing a guy for something that hopefully will go away as soon as we, you know, change out our president.
Yeah, supply chain is always exciting in that.
Yeah.
sense.
That's good. That's very good. Do you want to answer? Anybody else want to take a stab at that?
Well, speaking as a country that's just got into its own bit of tomfoolery
Yes,
with
man.
Brexit.
We kind of noticed that.
Everyone who wants out.
No. I spent the day in shock actually when the country made the biggest mistake of its existence. And but what we did immediately was put the prices up, which may sound a bit draconian, but our currency dropped 15% overnight, and we foresaw a similar rise in component costs, not through any ridiculous tariff impositions that Dave's talking about, but just sheerly because of the exchange rate, because everything you buy is either in $1, dollars, or euros, linked somehow. And we're having to anticipate how that will flow. Right now, we're having our best year ever, so it's not actually affecting us in a negative way. We don't sell a thing like an SM58, which has a price that everybody knows. So it didn't really,
$125.
it's not something that was a problem because although the product's relatively standard, there's different configurations. So you can't say what does a Timex cost, So it was something that I spent a little while thinking about. Then I thought it's just logical, really, and it worked because I watch the margins very carefully, and the margins matter for us to pile the money into the sport child that is the R&D.
You make all your money on purchasing, not on sale.
No, we make it. Well, I don't know if that's the way we're looking
Well,
at it. We make it on margin,
In terms of manufacturing, it is, like you say, sourcing parts and sourcing components and controlling that from start to finish. It is, talking to Jeff at Yorkville, is you control that supply chain from top to bottom, and the more vertically integrated you are, the more control you have over those things. So that is a very important thing. So,
But there's a scale that gets involved in that as well. So Yorkville is a respectably large manufacturer, and that scale benefits them in their supply chain.
100%.
I mean, speaking out of turn for Yorkville, but the smaller manufacturers don't have those benefits.
100%. And you could speak to that as
Yeah, we have a small pick and place and a small metal shop and small warehouse, and you try to do it all. And at sometimes the complexity of any specific design needs to be looked at to be done elsewhere. So you have to find partners and continue the research and continue the experiments and find allies that will assist you in the production processes.
Very cool. I'll ask one question, and then I think we'll open up to other questions. But do you guys have any book recommendations? Like, I'll read it.
Okay. The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman.
Man, Design of Everyday Things.
So everything that you think is common and correct about user interfaces, he'll explain to you how wrong you are.
Beautiful, beautiful.
This is your brain on music.
Yes. Fantastic book. Fantastic book. You got a book recommendation?
I'll have to think about it.
You have to think about that? Josh, you got a book recommendation, everybody, for design?
The Game Design Bible is fantastic. I'm butchering the name, though. Let me get back to you on the exact title.
Go for it. Kevin, you got a book recommendation?
Essentialism.
Essentialism?
Yeah.
I have 9 books on minimalism. It's a terrible thing.
Took a while.
You do realize there's a contradiction there, right?
I'm going to recommend Code Complete. Code Complete. I love that book. Absolutely love that book. For anybody who designs software, Code Complete. Changed my life. Absolutely changed my life. Man, we have a fantastic panel here. They're going to be around for a little bit, but I'm going to open the floor to a couple of questions, I think, more than anything. Oh, yeah, we got one in the back here.
Jim's got one. While I'm walking, can I ask one?
Yes, of course.
I've often said and I've hounded more than a few manufacturers at trade show booths, making the comment, it doesn't matter if it works, it only matters if I can use it. I mean, it only matters if it's operable, and in my world, usually when my hair is on fire and 15 people are yelling at me. So, I mean, we've touched on it, and in fact, someone just mentioned something about user interface. Could someone, or maybe more than one of you, comment on, in the design process, to what extent the user experience and your user interface enters into the thought process? Because it's very clear to me that that's not a commonly held ideal amongst manufacturers in our sector. We have some wonderful pieces of gear that are virtually impenetrable in terms of the ability of the user to actually deal with them.
I can answer that. On our product's behalf, it's almost at the top of the decision tree, actually, the user experience, because people use this stuff in live performance, surrounded by other screens, and have to make instant decisions. And we try and take away any too much information slows you down, you know. And so we design it on the basis of being task-based rather than function-based, which may sound a bit obscure, but if you compare and contrast a generic DSP machine, which is, I used to sell these things called sound webs, where you drew a block diagram, wired them up, and then built a GUI for it if you wanted. And there's loads of others like that, and they're fantastic things. But that is function-based. You know, if you get a signal from here to here, you have to go and open this fader and this. Right. With our thing, it's really is designed for you to leave that behind very quickly. Obviously, you go through it in stages, but it is designed to make task-based is the key to what it should do. And if we test how long it takes you to, for example, set up a crossfade of 8 channels on that queue, 8 tracks on that queue to 8 tracks on that queue, you know, how many keystrokes to get there, and how many times do you have to go and click in the toolbar to shake something off your mouse, your cursor. And if it's too many, we go back and rationalize it. So certainly from my point of view, we treat that as, I think that the modern idiom demands that, because the other extreme is software where you type it all in numbers, and that boat sailed so long ago. The software shouldn't look like software, really. It should look like a gaming engine or an extension of you. So that's something that we pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah, at the user interface level.
Yeah. At the user interface level, I beg your pardon. Yeah.
At the design level, you like
different
like
thing.
yeah.
No. I sort of was responding to the user interface question. Yeah.
We have to design for multiple layers of user interfaces as well. We have the professional, the person that's actually using the device. And then you have somebody that's setting up the device, and then you have upper management that is looking at the device as well. So you have multiple conversations that you have to have with one particular client, and you have to have ways to lock out or enable different users at different points in time. So it's a complicated question for us to really answer, because it's administrative rights. What is that particular user allowed to see, rather than so the user experience changes depending on their authority level. So it's a very complex question that we're feeling our way through getting those answers. But
in audio, is there any significant development of the video game processor as a low-cost parallel processor?
Graphics cards are incredibly cheap right now, and we've been leveraging parallel processing on GPUs more and more in games via either OpenCL or CUDA if you're NVIDIA-based. So graphics cards are just significantly better than CPUs at, well, most things.
Well, FPGAs, you know, you leverage FPGAs. You can now get FPGA on Amazon Web Services. So you can say, hey, I would like to rent an FPGA in a cloud. And you say, I'd like 500 of those FPGAs. And Amazon says, no problem. So in broadcast, you see it 100%. It's that malleable, it can be anything now and it can be anything later. But with Intel buying Altera is a big deal. I think the computer of 10 years from now will be very dangerous and very, very dangerous.
In a good way.
In a good way, yeah, yeah. Dangerous in the wrong hands, but also dangerous in the right hands too.
Well, dangerous. Yeah.
Everything I make is essentially a feedback engine in the wrong hands. Somebody have any other? Yeah, we got a deep question at the back here. Hopefully it's really deep.
Hey, I'm not sure how deep it is, but in the last 5 years, the IT industry has gone to residual revenue en masse. And since we use IT as a backbone in just about everything we do these days, do you see us in the next 5 years not being solely a part of that system? Because it appears that now that we live in layer 3, the only thing we may be making in the future are endpoints, microphones and loudspeakers, and everything else is, done through the computer or processor, not even necessarily making hardware anymore, but only licensing software.
Somebody has to know how the audio actually works. So someone who understands audio has to write that software.
Oh, I completely agree, but there are lots of audio companies that are making software that understand audio. I'm just wondering, do you think that there's going to be a future where we're not all forced into residual revenue? Because it appears that we're certainly already on that path.
I think it comes down to scale. The question comes down, are we going to have audio running over RJ45 in our homes, and our endpoints in our homes going to be depacketizing audio content? And it's a good question. I really don't know. It's the skill set of the everyday user. It's got to work auto-magically. If I plug the thing in, I want it to auto-discover and recognize and announce to the network what it is. If every end user, every consumer needs to be an IT professional at the same time, I don't think that's going to be true. You're going to have analog signals, you're going to have digital signals in the home for the foreseeable future.
Except the consumer's already paying residually for just about everything they're using, from their music to their other contents. So I'm not necessarily talking about them understanding the technology. I'm talking about, especially in the pro audio space, is there a way in the future where we live outside of residual revenues? Because otherwise a manufacturer sells a piece of software once, where if you look at like Microsoft Office, we're paying monthly. I just wonder if that's where we're going to be.
Worth pointing out that some audio systems are mission critical. If you have a room full of people, you don't want to lose your audio because you've dropped your internet connection.
Or at an airport.
Yeah, or many other applications where
Fire systems.
audio has to work. Absolutely has to work. So those will be, isolated, dedicated systems probably forever because of that high reliability requirement.
I think the subscription model is not going away. I think we'll be able to buy DSP curves forever and ever on things. There are certain patents that will soon expire that allow people to leverage microservices. And microservices aren't a term that we use often in audio, but essentially a plugin, like a VST plugin, is a microservice. So I connect audio to this microservice that is out there. And I think we're going to be renting those forever and ever until people run out of ideas of what to draw on a GUI. But ultimately, an EQ is an EQ is an EQ is an EQ, but the GUI business is really never going to end.
We have a situation where we sell these boxes into installations, and there are other ways to get audio playing every day in a museum or on an expo site or something. And we do find people saying, I could put a Mac Mini in there or something like that, but I just kind of want a bit of hardware that's not a computer. And
don't knock the hardware.
There's an instinct. There's an instinct there that computers have a sort of they're sort of consumables and disposable, and it has been and also the internet thing is extremely valid and beyond mission critical. Actually, there's almost commercial mission criticality sometimes on things like an expo site or a an exhibitor experience. That people have paid to go to, they have a massive credibility problem if people go to see this thing and it breaks down. And so it's actually people have been drawn to this because it can do what you could do in a computer, plus actually have the DSP management built in as well, but not be a computer.
But COTS, off
Most
the
large-
shelf.
I was just going to add, most large audio systems are for paying audiences, so that mission-critical scenario applies there.
Yeah, absolutely. But the off-the-shelf aspect of computing power is within reach to everyone.
Sure, yeah, you can do it in a computer.
So leveraging that and distributing it, in a system that I just recently installed it was a 2-hour show, but it took 3 days to set up. And this 2-hour show, you distribute the resources around, so when something fails, you have some type of backup and redundancy. But you build for resiliency instead of a redundant network in some cases, in some way, shapes, or forms. But you're 100% right in terms of question at the back. Oh, we got a... Oh, yeah.
Hey, sorry. Lucy from LS Media. I'm also an end user mixer. And it's great, the move to digital. We opened up a lot of doors, and the move to cloud computing, we're going to open up a lot more doors, and things need to progress into the future. But I'm wondering, from a manufacturer and a design standpoint, about this licensing now that we're moving more to software and away from hardware specifically. What I'm getting at is, each time I'm opening my X software, if it's connected to the internet, it's phoning home, it's asking for the license authentication. Well, that's great, but in live sound, I always have the philosophy that the technology needs to be able to work in a mine. It needs to be able to be, end user serviced or support person serviced. I'm not talking about how to do it. If you have a certified individual there, it all needs to be able to work without the internet, because when your $100,000, $200,000 machine is now a brick because I don't have the internet, my client doesn't understand why they paid for that, and I can't sell that in the future to my customer because it's not bulletproof. Yeah. And is there my real question is, things like iLok, that's great. That's one company that's dealt with licensing exclusively, and they do a really good job of that. I can carry a physical key with me that tells the machine wherever I am that I own that license. Will there be an audio industry or show industry specific licensing application or theory or program, some sort of software that's developed independent from this internet security? Or are we going to just rely on companies like iLok to hopefully support us in the future? And are we going to rely on internet providers and Google and these types of people to dictate how our security and how our software authenticates itself?
Boom.
Are you worried about it?
Fantastic question.
Are you worried about that?
I don't have an answer for that.
You don't have an answer? Yeah.
I don't have an answer either, other than my mission-critical statement from before.
The mission-critical statement, I think, is absolutely it. I think the application will be the access. Having access to the application. I would love to rent AutoCAD by the minute. I'm not in AutoCAD right now. Why am I paying for AutoCAD? I would love to use it by the drink. And I think having applications that are by the drink could be beneficial to this industry as a whole. I see a lot of operators here who have idle tools right now that have cost them money and are dead applications. But I look at the computer as something that is it is a living thing that I can host more living things on. I look at Pro Tools as a microservice to the operating system that I'm ultimately plugging it into. So if I don't think the iLok thing is the ultimate solution, unless unless it was built into the computer or built into my personality. But I have 10 computers in my life, and I would rather have 0. And I would rather just be able to go to a shelf and grab a computer and be able to do my thing. But the computing process I have is not equalized among all of these things, so my licenses have to travel. I have to travel with my licenses, and I have to take that authorization with me. In the same way that Apple and the digital rights management of media has to be managed someplace, the licensing of applications have to be managed some way. I think stuff like the Apple Store, the Google Play Store, those types of things are, the iLock Store, the DigiDesign Avid Store, whatever they call it. They are business models that are new to the community, but I don't use everything all at the same time, and I would like to be billed based on what it is. My issue with plugins is 10 years from now, that plugin's not going to work. So I've seen records where they buy a Pro Tools system, they put it on a pallet with the I/O, and just like, okay, that's one record's Pro Tools system, and when I want to remix it, I have to undo the whole pallet and take it off the shelf and be able to do that. So it's the future-proofing of sessions. That's my biggest fear with all of these licenses. But if the perpetual software is constantly licensed and maintained as a one moving piece of an environment, you have to buy into that ecosystem. So we'll see what ends up happening with that. Any other questions? Oh, there's a question up front here. Oh, yeah, right here. Oh, yeah. Oh, tough one. We got a tough one coming here, guys.
It wasn't so much a tough one. It was more just kind of a general comment. I mean, I think when you're thinking about reliability for live systems, I think a lot of it is about proximity, the location of the compute. There's the notion that just because it's subscription doesn't mean that it's remote.
Right.
And
yes.
Just because it's subscription doesn't mean that it needs to have some sort of a factor in the way that the enforcement is designed such that if it's offline for 30 seconds, that your show goes down.
Yes.
I mean, these are all, I think, completely achievable problems, and it's more about choices that have been made historically around copy protection schemes and such that have burnt all of us many a time.
More 407, less ferry boat. Like pay by the mile, pay by the drink. After the show, I get billed for it, or my license gets dinged. But before the show or during the show, I don't want any of that. I don't want to pay to get on to be able to do the production. I want to be charged after I use the device.
If you're running a show, you do not want your license to expire and go to silent.
I have seen a radio station. I have seen 6 radio stations simultaneously running on a computer get knocked out by a Windows update simultaneously. and it was incredible. One guy comes in and says, "Hey, we're off the air," and then another guy comes in, "We're off the air too," and then a third guy comes in, "We're up," and I'm like, "This is a comedy routine. I got to leave." Any other questions? This is very good. I'm enjoying myself here.
Do we have another? There's also a bit of a sort of a tail wagging the dog aspect to this, especially in enterprise scale operations, because of the push from the IT world, right? Everybody in a corner office is very familiar, or at least they suspect they're familiar, with things like, or buzz phrases like software-defined networking and
Bitcoin.
NFV, and virtualization will get you almost anywhere now. I mean, in the way that saying regulatory affairs once bought me $1 million worth of loudness meters.
Yes.
Because it was a regulatory issue, and so suddenly, the wallet was opened. Being able to say today in a lot of places that, well, we're virtualizing. Suddenly you go, whoa, great, that's the new thing. That's awesome. Here, have some, what? We're virtualizing something? That's great. And the next time someone in the context of production or broadcasting says, well, we'll just spin up. I mean, the words spin and up used that close together sets my teeth, sort of buzzing, and I want to punch someone in the throat. because it's generally uttered by someone who has never sweated a 10 count.
Yeah.
Right? And if you've never sort of clenched as someone is counting down from 10, there's a limit to which you're kind of allowed to have an opinion. about some things, especially stuff that's mission critical. But it's the IT push. It's that networking and all things IP. We all get what the transition is, but the fight for us right now, especially in broadcasting, is where to find the support. You've got two choices. You can take really good, competent broadcast engineers and you can send them back to school and hope that they're gifted and talented enough and have enough sort of forward thinkingness about them to learn how to be networking professionals. Or you can find some IT guys and hope like hell you can teach them about audio and video and a bunch of other things. And you could do either of those. Neither of them is a silver bullet. But without media savvy networking people, we're done.
Yeah,
and it doesn't matter what the manufacturers do, because again, it has to be deployable. And right now, it's more like plug and plug, not plug and play.
Yeah. Oh, does anybody want to talk to that?
I think that's why we participate in the IP showcase to try to teach what we know and also learn from other broadcasters of what they know and how we can work together to solve those problems of make it work auto-magically is what we're trying to do, but without those conversations, then we're just a manufacturer that have ideas that we're trying to push.
How many people here could you guys are excluded? You know, what's a subnet mask? You know, if I said variable length subnet mask, what does that mean? Yeah, what is a 10 count? You know, some of these people don't even know what a 10 count is. I'm worried about the broadcast IT infrastructure and the IT infrastructure, but it comes from new, fresh people who have grown up in the IT world. Yeah, it's difficult to bend different things into different things. And the IT world is being bent into carrying very media-rich and real-time, you know, transporting very real-time, mission-critical stuff. So we're seeing people designing redundancies into redundancies, and then the redundancies on top of that because of paranoia. As IT networks grow infinitely, the only thing that scales infinitely is segmentation, I find. So, you know, networks on top of networks will ultimately be the solution, as it is the solution here. You know, mine is mission critical because it doesn't touch yours. Mine is reliable because it's completely independent of yours. As long as departments take ownership of their responsibility, I think the department will learn to ride on top of the pipelines that they give it. So I think it takes departments to say, we're going to do this. This is going to happen. Show me the pipe. I think it takes a forward thinker to say, this is what's happening, deal with it, opposed to someone saying, hey, can you help me deal with this? I think shoving it down people's throats is a little bit easier than saying, deal with my fire hose I'm going to shove down your throat. So that's I could talk for hours on the topic, and I will. So there's that. Anybody else want to answer to that about the IT question? You know, like, how do we get more IT people coming through schools? Or is this the big hole in the market we're all looking for?
Well, you know, if the IT people are going to be managing the audio systems, then they should have some direct live experience. With the 10 count going down and the blinking lights are not working on the machine yet.
Yeah.
Nothing quite like that to make you very careful in the future.
It's true. I was a master controller and I was off the air for 37 seconds, but my boss said it was actually 15 minutes. And when you're in that panic and you're running around with your head cut off, time moves very differently.
Yep.
Anybody else with that?
And they have to know that a subnet mask is not an adult Halloween costume.
There you go.
Thanks, Blair.
Hey, Blair, that's wonderful.
He's here all week.
Yeah. There's too many technology jokes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, where's Blair? He was laughing at his own joke behind the curtain. Sorry, Jim.
I thought I was loud enough.
Nope.
In answer to your question, I think you start recruiting kids in grade 10 who are doing really well in STEM, and you teach them audio or whatever it is that you need to put on top of the STEM courses somehow.
Yeah. Oh, we got a question up here. Sorry, we're running a little over, but I enjoy this dialogue, and we have a supper break. So
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
So, well, on that topic, when is AI gonna learn our behaviors and needs, so our contribution to the sound world is irrelevant? Sorry for being so negative, but it will happen one day.
Dan Dugan.
Sorry,
He's mixed a lot of TV.
I didn't really catch the question. How does AI affect?
Or when do you think it'll render us all useless?
I think you're starting to see it now. We just wrapped up a week in Amsterdam, and there was a lot of AI being shown on the floor, but they'll just show one aspect of it. Anthony was videotaping himself with a piece of AI that was just looking for his eyes and his mouth. So if his head was down, he was not attentive, and if he was looking up, he was attentive. And so that particular company is showing that one piece of software. So it's a matter of taking the metadata from that software and putting it into a real-world application on perhaps opening or closing a microphone that's associated with that person, or a tally system on where they're looking into a camera. Those are the types of things that I've seen, and it's just a matter of putting those pieces together into a workflow that makes sense.
Soon, very soon, you will have no job.
Resistance is futile.
Somebody has to program the computers that program the other computers that program the other computers. Is that right, Josh? It's like, there's a hierarchy of computer intelligence as well, and that will never go away. So learn how to code. You be the AI. Be the AI for now. Be the AI.
And with that, I'll say thank you, gentlemen, for
Cheers.
a wonderful session. Thank you all.
Thank you.